Jose.
So, welcome everyone to the Museums Association Conference, and this is the session on repatriation and restitution. I'm Simon Stevens from the MA, and I'm facilitating this session. Before I hand over to our chair, Steph Scholten, I have the usual housekeeping announcements to make. Firstly, as attendees, your cameras and microphones should be automatically disabled, but you can use the chat function on your menu bar to talk to other people, introduce yourselves and share ideas and experiences. You can also tweet using our conference hashtag, which is #museums2020. There will be some time for questions today, so if there's something you'd like to address to the speakers, please share it via the Q&A. You can leave and rejoin the session at any time. A reminder that we're recording all sessions, including this one, and it will be available on our website next week. We have both audio description and live closed captioning for every session. If you require audio description, please press interpretation on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen and select French. Please leave the original audio or you'll not be able to hear the conference speaker. Live captioning is also available at the bottom of the screen. If you require this, press closed captioning and select show subtitles. Hopefully you shouldn't have any technical problems with this session, but if you do have any problems, just email me, send me a message in the chat privately. Okay, with all that out of the way, I will now hand over to Steph Scholten so we can get this session started.
Welcome, dear colleagues. Thank you, Simon. Welcome, dear colleagues, from a virtual Hunterian museum at the University of Glasgow. Thank you for joining us for this session and us being in this case, and you can show yourselves, dear colleagues. We have Neil Curtis from Museums and Special Collections of the University of Aberdeen. We have Valerie Walters from the Chickasaw Cultural Center in Oklahoma, USA. We have Esme Ward of Manchester Museum at the University of Manchester, and Laura van Broekhoven, Director of the Pitt Rivers Museum at Oxford University. As introductions go, the blurb for this session reads that we will focus on recent examples of constructive and meaningful engagement between UK university museums and source communities, and that are working on the restitution and repatriation of museum objects. And this session showcases three case studies featuring interviews with representatives of the communities involved, and one live being with Valerie. And the case studies are followed by a discussion focusing on the processes and ways of working necessary to be able to constructively engage. And that is exactly what we'll do, but I can, we had hoped actually to bring in more more representation from the source communities into this session, in the sense that we had secured funding to actually bring physically some of these colleagues over to Edinburgh. But that was in the days way back when we thought that this conference was actually going to be an in-person, physical, traditional conference. There's great things about this virtual version of it because of the democratizing aspect of it. Many more people can actually participate, but it does unfortunately mean that some forms of engagement are not possible in the way that we had emphasized. As said, this session will focus on the process of engagement with source communities, and we will try to stay away from the legalities of it. But sometime during this session, I'll ask our colleagues from ACE to give us a quick update on how the development of guidance on restitution and repatriation, as they have commissioned it, how that is progressing. But let's first get some impressions of the work that has been done. And we start with Manchester Museum, who worked with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, IATSIS, on the unconditional repatriation of 43 secret and sacred ceremonial objects to the Aranda people of Central Australia, to the Kangalida Garawa peoples of Northwest Queensland, and the Nyamal people of the Pilbara and Yawuru people of Broome. So Simon, if you could please start Esme's films, and could we, yes. Simon? Could you
Just a
start?
minute, just locating it, won't be a sec.
Okay.
Just bear with me, nearly there.
Just very emotional to know these items still exist and that they are able to return home. Yeah, it's hard to kind of quantify exactly what it means to us as a people, especially as a young person myself, knowing that these items were made by some of my ancestors, were used on country, and being able to play a part in bringing them home it's quite significant to me.
It's not about items coming back and they're going to sit in a glass cabinet in a museum somewhere. They're going to form a very real part of cultural revitalisation amongst our mob back home.
The tribe's happy when they got items that went away without any consent.
And I am absolutely convinced that more museums will follow, and I really hope they do, because so often when we talk about repatriation, we talk about what we lose, and actually we don't talk about what we gain.
We can't keep our culture and our traditions alive and strong if we don't have access to the tools and items that allow us to practice, preserve, and develop these ancient and sacred customs. These cultural heritage items and artifacts here and all around the world must return back to the country where they belong, because like us, they are of the land. They weren't made in some warehouse in China or in a factory in London. They came from the land, our home. They give my people hope, life, meaning, sustenance, and a future. As with all social movements towards change and progress, this is but the first step, a stepping stone in the right direction towards a better and more inclusive future. We share a dark history, but it's moments like this when we come together as one, united by our shared desire to do better, to be better, and to right the wrongs of the past, that we start to heal the spiritual wounds and the intergenerational trauma that still exists today.
Thank you, Stephen, Simon, for that. Sorry. And we move from Australia to Africa, and we'll have a short look at the work the Pitt Rivers Museum has done in the Maasai Living Sculpture Project, working with Maasai representatives from both Kenya and Tanzania. Could you start those videos, please? Thank you.
I'm Laura van Broekhoven, and I'm the director of the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is one of the 4 museums of the University of Oxford. It's quite well known for its Victorian age space and also its really rich collections, which were largely gathered during the height of the British Empire. I was involved very closely in a project that we were going to talk about a little bit more today, which is called the Maasai Living Cultures Project. The project is a partnership project. We developed it with an Oxford-based participatory video making NGO that works with Indigenous people on self-representation to advocate for human rights, land rights, and now also cultural rights. And the project forms part of a program of work that the museum has developed over several decades, really, where we are working closely with communities, Indigenous peoples, people living in diaspora, to find better ways to care for the collections and tell more meaningful stories through more plural perspectives. Sometimes those conversations will also involve discussing whether objects need to return to their originating communities. Now, with regards to the Maasai Living Cultures project, after an initial visit by award-winning human rights activist, Tanzanian human rights activist, Samuel Nangiria in 2017, the museum received a video where Maasai traditional elders voiced their concerns on Maasai objects being in the UK without their consent, and about the interpretation being made on labels and the assumptions that were being made without any involvement of theirs. They expressed how annoyed they were at this, and that they would like to engage in conversations. Now, with InsightShare's help, I replied in a video message inviting a delegation to come to the museum so that we could discuss further. During different subsequent visits, Maasai delegates from Kenya and Tanzania have identified concerns over 5 of the 188 objects in the museum. They've also advised on 6 objects that are in the museum in Cambridge, that those are also quite problematic. They've indicated that without spiritual guidance and possibly an intervention around their continued presence in Oxford and Cambridge, there would be great concern. It could cause ongoing damage in their communities with specific families. We're awaiting further guidance from the Chief Laibon on this issue to find ways forward with the Maasai community. And conversations have also started at the Pitt Rivers Museum about the way the museum speaks about the Maasai in its displays, in its databases, and in education programs. And some first changes have been made. For a Laibon to travel with the sacred Enkiduong was a very unique occasion, as the Enkiduong had never left Kenya before. And the visual aspect of the project has been quite strong, with documentaries being made and documentary films have documenting the progress of the project. Which was quite iterative and sort of has organically grown. The partnership with the Maasai very much fits within the broader work of the Pitt Rivers Museum as part of its Origins and Futures program, where we work with Indigenous people and people living in diaspora. And we've been able to sort of engage artists, community members, specialists from all over the world that have a vested interest in the collections and how they could be better cared for and spoken about through more plural and more honest perspectives that on the one hand openly acknowledge and engage with their coloniality while also unlocking other more meaningful interpretations and futures towards a sort of pluriversal perspective.
We are getting a second video. Simon?
In the next video, you'll see Samuel Nangiria sitting on the floor of my office and explaining in a conversation with me what he feels needs to change in the approaches that museums take to objects.
Have gone through. We would like the museum to know that you are not holding the artifacts. You are holding the communities. You are holding a very horrible history that our people have gone through. You are holding a secret of exactly what happened. And you are holding the keys to be able to enable the communities and people, individuals and communities, to understand. And from that understanding, we will be able to get a new direction, retrieving the history and setting the right history, setting the right information. Because it's only then that we can think about radical change. Unless we learn, unless we understand, unless the museum is ready to compromise some of its establishing principle to be a place of people, to be not to be a place of artifacts, like to be a home of people, to understand the people, to understand the feeling, to understand the emotion, to understand part of history, what we've gone through as a people. If we need to get radical change, it's actually the museum has to decolonize its practices. The museum has to be not for science alone, but for humanity. We've been feeling emotional. We've been going through radical kind of vibration in our hearts when we see this object. These objects, you see objects, we see our parents, we see our ancestors. It's an opportunity that we can retrieve the history, and history will help us confront the current struggles. And I look forward to see more of side of engagement with other indigenous people all over the world, because the healing is not for the Maasai alone, it's the healing of the whole planet, because the planet is reacting. We see the planet is shaking. Everybody is worried about the future, climate change. But it's the result of irresponsible kind of life we have lived. We have detached ourselves from nature. We have detached ourselves from cultures that have permanent relationship with nature. And we've been dwelling with science, investment, money, and all this. And I think everyone is now a witness that it's time to reflect. And indigenous people will lead the world in that direction of reflection. Thank you.
Powerful message indeed. I think we first go to Neil and Valerie to do something to talk similarly about their experience of collaboration. And I'll give the floor to Neil and Valerie, but only after thanking Valerie for joining us this early in the day from the USA. Thank you very much. And we're popping some links in the chat for you to look at that will have more information about the different projects that we're talking about.
Thank you. I'm delighted that Valerie and I are able to talk about what is a sort of open-ended developing relationship between the University of Aberdeen and the Chickasaw Nation and maybe other nations in the southern US. So it's not about repatriation in the obvious sense, though the University of Aberdeen has been involved in repatriation. I mean, that's something that might come, but that's not the focus of this. Instead, it's more about restitution. So it's about sharing that and passing over that responsibility for items that have been in the collections in Aberdeen for a long time. So I'd like to start by trying to show you just a picture of what I'm talking about. There we go. So this is one of about 10 items. It's a beaded sash, so it's about a metre long, made of blue cloth with red and white beads in a sort of scroll pattern. And this slide shows close-ups of them, which I think is quite a significant point that we'll come to. So this beadwork was collected in the 1760s by William Ogilvie, who was a graduate of Aberdeen University, and he was secretary to the Superintendent of Indian Affairs in the Southern District. So this is before American independence. He probably acquired this through various treaty negotiations. We really don't have much knowledge about provenance. We assume it's maybe Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, but we don't have that provenance yet to pin it down to a particular nation. He gave it to the university certainly before 1811, but after which point it's been in the University Museum collection. So our first contact was a loan to the Cherokee National Museum in 2008, and that was followed by a loan to the Chickasaw Cultural Centre in 2015. So what we're talking is something that's growing and is now developing more, particularly with the Chickasaw and also with the Choctaw, and not forgetting the Cherokee. And now we're working on a recognition-funded project called Caring and Sharing, which is looking after the collections, improving their storage and documentation, doing provenance research, and also discussing with people what sort of images, what sort of photographs should be delivered and how we should be sharing things. And so, as you saw on the slide, close-up photographs are tremendously useful for craft workers, and that's one of the things that's driving this. But I think I'd like to pass over to Valerie now. So there's a couple of questions, and I'll ask you firstly, can you sort of briefly outline the significance of this material to the Chickasaw Nation?
Yes, well, good morning from me. Thank you all for letting me join you today. And certainly it has been a pleasure working with Neil and working with this beadwork collection, and of course our continued relationship and collaboration. But specifically talking about the beadwork collection, one of the most important things that happened when the beadwork was with us within our community is that we were able to see patterns we've never seen before in person. So not only was it a beautiful display to have here at the Chickasaw Cultural Center, but this actually inspired our beaders to begin beading those patterns again. And not only us as in the Chickasaws, but I know that Neil has also been introduced and now has formed a great relationship with the Choctaw Nation as well too. And so this has just become an amazing collaboration and expanding project, if you will, because it really is very meaningful to our community. It gives us the opportunity to see parts of our history that, again, we've never seen before in person. So I certainly want to express that and express the importance of this beadwork to us, and that now it's something that we can try to revitalize as well too.
And what do you think has been the most important aspect of this relationship that we're developing?
Well, I want to visit a little bit regarding our relationship. And of course, Neil and I now have worked together since 2014. We've had a wonderful journey along the way in this. And I think one of the most important things when working with us as the Chickasaw Nation, and really working with a lot of tribal nations, is building a relationship and building trust within the two organizations that are going to work together, and understanding each other, understanding the respect that comes with the items, with the exhibit, whatever it may be. And so for Neil and I, and of course a lot of people within the Chickasaw Nation, it was a great opportunity to see the beadwork, and that was, you know, a great blessing. But I will say that part of that is the relationship that we have built too with Neil and the University of Aberdeen. So when Neil decided he was going to be part of this journey, it was quite a journey for him, I believe, because it is about building that relationship and trust. And so it wasn't simply Neil brought the exhibit and laid it out. That's not what happened here. He came with us. He was a part of our community. He was able to visit so many community members, meaning Chickasaw folks, as well as other tribals, and then just local townspeople. So it was really about this overall adventure and relationship and journey that we have taken together to build that trust and get to know each other and understand both organizations, and that we're both trying to do good things. And that helps in moving forward with our next collaboration.
Thank you. Back to Steph. Thank you very much, Val.
Thank you. That's a perfect bridge. I also see in the chat that relationship building. I think that's a key aspect of all of this. And I think building relationship take time. It's something where we make mistakes, so we can maybe later talk a bit about those as well. But definitely that there is a lot of things that we need to do as museums to be able to engage well and respectfully with the communities of origin. I think maybe Esme, I think your process was the longest of all that we are discussing today. Can you tell a bit about that, and you know, what were the crucial bits that actually made this repatriation happen?
Yeah, I think well, I'm going to build on the notion of relationship building. Really, I think it's that sense of collective endeavour and people. So I do want to really acknowledge some of it involved a lot of people. I'm going to talk first about the people at the museum. So the curator at the time, the wonderful Stephen Welsh, our conservator Erit Narkis, our registrar Gillian Smithson, our comms lead Alia Ullah, another conservator from the John Rylands Library, Mark Furness, myself, a whole host of us. And the museum, we have been returning human remains since 2003. We've got experienced staff, a real commitment to this work. And so I think you have that solid base, but really critical for our process was an organisation you've already mentioned called AATSIS. So the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, they really led the engagement. There was so much work that happened pre-museum. They led so much work on country and engagement with those source communities. They really supported the research and process, and they have years of experience. They have cultural authority and an ethical engagement and methodology, which I feel we have really learned from, and our collaboration with them is critical. And then, of course, you know, the traditional owners, it really, the generosity of spirit, the dignity and openness from those conversations that we had really gave that sense that this was a collective endeavour. And also, I'll be honest, in terms of seeing the repatriation process come to fruition, a really strong commitment and will. Which was an intention. I think intentionality is really important here. So we prioritise this. We were mid-capital project. Staff weren't doing maybe quite the work they would otherwise do. We prioritise this process, and the university in which I'm part of, Manchester University, that context was really important. So not just from a kind of governance or legislative perspective, but more the notion of academic freedom, that sense of global connectedness, and at Manchester, a real commitment to social responsibility actually created a very interesting context for this work. And I think is one of the reasons that the university board so readily and unanimously supported unconditional repatriation.
I think I think you're mentioning some of the very essentials, I think, of the process. I think it helps to have an organization like AATSIS that more museums in the UK have now been in touch with and who. Sorry, I muted myself, sorry. Something funny is happening here. I'm not touching the chat anymore. So AATSIS, they've engaged with many more museums in the UK recently, and they've now more funding to continue their work in years to come. So I think we're going to see more on this front. And I was actually going to put in the chat the recent ethical guidance that they have produced that can be found on their website. But anytime I touch enter now, I mute myself, so I won't do that anymore. So maybe somebody else can do that. So in the meantime, please join put questions in the Q&A if you have any, because we'll get to that later on in this session. But first, I think maybe to Laura, On the Pitt Rivers website, there's a massive amount of resources around your project, which is great. But if you feel that there is one essential element in your engagement with the Maasai peoples, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think, and just building on, I'd be really pleased that the sort of, it's very much building on what Esme was saying in the sort of relationship building. And I think also in the openness towards what that relationship needs to be and who needs to be included in that relationship. What was really a constant in the project was that it was an organic and sort of organically evolving project where we needed to show the complete flexibility in both timings, but also what needed to be done. And that it was very much our Maasai delegates who needed to, on the one hand, be constantly checking with the community in Tanzania and Kenya through social media, but also when they were there, the project was a continuum. So that it's unlike in Australia and New Zealand and other parts of the sort of Anglo-Saxon world where there's quite well-established institutions who are helping to guide the process. With the Maasai, it's very much a process that is being designed while we're doing it. So it's not similar to Ayatsis, who we are also very lucky to have part of that sort of memorandum of understanding with. For the Maasai, and I think that goes for most of the world really, that isn't part of the sort of Anglo-Saxon world. Many of these sort of established routes do not exist yet, and are often also not supported by governments. And so, for example, in just yesterday, I received a message from Samuel, which is really upsetting message, but a real true reality where I think as museums, we can feel quite powerless of things that are happening more broadly politically, where he just let me know that 6 Maasai have been shot. 2 of them were died in the last couple of days after the Tanzanian elections that have just happened over the last week. And I know we're all focused on the US elections, but there's elections happening across the globe. And often those elections of national governments will affect indigenous communities because, beyond the sort of work that we are doing in museums, there is this political reality which has a continued rootedness in the colonialities that we're sort of seeing materialized in our collections, but they're very much also materialized still in the contemporary. And I think that is just important for us as museums to understand that sometimes projects will suddenly have a much longer lifespan and will need to have a long lifespan. I think that is where these relationships of trust are being built, that it's so important that they're embedded in the whole organization. So this inclusion of so many different individuals in your organization, your boards being completely brought into the process, and also the establishment of policies and procedures as much as possible is crucial to these processes, I think.
It's a horrible message in a way, and so really sorry to hear that. But I do think, we are talking about the long game. We're talking about long relationships that we need to build. And maybe Valerie and Neil, could you reflect on, what happened that really clicked and that will allow you to go forward in years to come, and maybe also where didn't it click and where did it went wrong? Did it go wrong anywhere along the way that you felt like, oops, this is not the way to do it?
Yeah, I don't think anything particular has gone wrong, except I have now learned how to illegally export things. But we'll pass over that one. But aside from that, I think the critical thing, and the way this responds to one of the questions I've seen in the Q&A, is not imposing a model from a museum here. It's being open-minded, being open to let things go where they will. And I am really concerned that we're starting to get a very shouty world here that says we've got to repatriate things at people. And it's so much more important to be listening and understanding. And I certainly, talking to Val since more recently, looking back on, what we did initially, I now realize how much I was being sussed out early on. And that two-way watching and understanding, but treating each other as people, not as something alien or repatriation. It's these big clunky words that we start using, and I think it's much more just about being, you know, human and humane. But Val, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, certainly. I would completely agree with the part of Neil being very open-minded. I think in building our relationship and really just sort of clicking from the beginning, if you will, that we both come into this project open-minded. We both had goals that we wanted to meet in this, and we worked together to ensure that we met those goals. Really, as a team, we came together as a team, us and all of our counterparts, if you will, to ensure that we brought about a beautiful display, that it was well taken care of, that it was here, that Neil was comfortable with it being here. So I think that really the open-mindedness was the best thing Neil could have brought into our relationship, into our conversations, and certainly into the exhibit. And because of that, and because of the way that we worked together very easily. We really didn't have many hangups other than, you know, legally bringing the items in here, which I think Neil learned from that to let me do all the paperwork in that situation. So but no, we actually just had a really great relationship from the start of this. And that has built the trust, built the foundation. And that's really why it's blossomed into, okay, the next thing that we're going to do, you know, we will visit with the University of Aberdeen. They will visit with us. And in fact, I just want to share quickly that our cultural center here just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. Well, as we went to a virtual celebration, as everyone else did as well, you know, we wanted to include our partners and our friends who have made a significant difference over this 10 years. And of course, I called Neil up or emailed and said, hey, would you be willing to do this? And absolutely he was. And I think it brought this special level to that anniversary celebration as well, to show the world really that we are able to have these communities and these partners and these friends everywhere and continue this great connection and collaboration.
Can I just add one point to what we're saying? That, well, two things. One is that it started with a loan, and the way we managed the loan was the one member of staff from the museum hand couriered this to the Cherokee National Museum, and then I hand couriered it back. Rather than using a professional courier, we did it ourselves, and that sort of immediately led into personal contact. And the other thing is, you know, the idea that it's not just that Val and I have become friends. I mean, it is about how we go beyond that into the broader institution. So the current project, this Caring and Sharing project, we've only been meeting virtually, obviously, over the last few months. And, you know, internationally, this helps. We're bringing in more people from, you know, both sides of the Atlantic into this discussion in lots of different ways. So it deepens it and makes it much more than just a one-to-one relationship.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I would add to that is the fact that we are being consulted on these items of First Americans, because these are very important to us. And I would strongly suggest everyone reach out to Indigenous communities when working with these type of items and build those relationships and those foundations for mutual respect. And I think that's how Neil and I have continued to grow in our organizations working together, is just because we have a really strong foundation. And we're to the point now, both, you know, in our friendship and in our work relationship as well too, that if something is wrong, if something's not right, we can just talk to each other about it. There's no hard feelings. There's no, you know, we're not going to have a battle right now. We can just talk to each other and work through the situation.
And that is because you have built a relationship and you trust each other now, which is fabulous. I think there's a lot of attempts currently trying to harness the experience around restitution and repatriation, trying to create guidelines and guidance in different shapes and forms. What I found an excellent example was the Indian Arts Research Center last year published guidelines for collaboration. I thought that was quite good. They had both for communities and a set for museums as well. I thought that was very instructive. I myself am working with the university museums and academic collections group from ICOM on some more guidance for university museums. So hopefully that we'll be able to present that somewhere in the next year. And maybe this is a moment to quickly invite Kate Bellamy in from ACE, because we all know that there has been work commissioned to create guidance for UK museums around repatriation. And also, I think Kate put in the chat that there is funding available for the kind of work that we need to do in UK museums around this. Would it be possible, Simon, to let Kate in for a moment?
Yeah, she should be coming.
And there she is.
Hi.
Hello,
Hello.
Kate. Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Everybody. Can you hear me?
We can. Can you give us a quick rundown of where you are?
Yes, I'll be quick. So this in February, Arts Council England, we commissioned the Institute of Art and Law to produce some new practical guidance to support UK museums to better understand and more proactively deal with all matters relating to restitution and repatriation. This was in response to, we hosted a roundtable with ICOM and with the British Council to understand what was needed in this area. And this is the feedback we got from museums representatives at that roundtable, that what they really wanted was some more practical guidance. It's not new policy, it's really sort of, is that practical guidance, like I say. The project has been managed by Arts Council England, but we've had a lot of input from a steering group, and we're made up of colleagues from across the sector, many of whom are here today. Hello. And also in consultation with a wider group of sector representatives and representatives from claimant communities. We're currently working on the second draft. We've had quite significant feedback on the first draft from the steering group and others. So we're currently working on the second draft, and we hope to publish that in the spring now.
Okay, so that's something to look forward to. As I said in my introduction, we won't get into the legalities of this, because there's quite a few things, of course, that we have to take into account. There's a lot of governance issues around this that need to be solved at institutional and national levels. So that is no mean feat. And I think the ACE guidance will actually will evidence that. Thank you, Kate, for joining us and giving us this update. I think there's some good questions have come up in the Q&A. One of them is about the politics of this. Helen from Derbyshire has asked, is the political fear in the contemporary about the role of repatriation in dismantling institutions? Do we still need to do more to talk about the context and histories of the institutions themselves, as well as the objects? Is there a reflection from one of the panelists on the role of our institutions and towards, I guess, in our relationship with Indigenous communities? Esme?
Yeah, if I understand the question, I suppose, so one of the things that has emerged for us out of the relationship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders communities is a real sense of what we've gained, and so I've said it many times, but it really strikes me how often when we're talking about repatriation it is framed as loss. The amount of people who spoke to me about the slippery slope we were heading down, actually we've not had one repatriation request since last year, but anyway, that's often the way it's presented. But actually what we really focus on is what we've gained, and it's all the things that actually Neil and Valerie have just spoken so beautifully about. It's those relationships, but also it is very different perspectives and ways of thinking about the world. The film that Lara shared with us is wonderful. It's such an important voice and perspective. And in a way, I hope that what we do moving forward is we start to bring those perspectives to the fore, because they're at the heart of this work. And I'm really delighted the John Ellen Foundation fantastically have supported us on a new programme called Indigenising Manchester Museum, but it involves establishing a network of other museums internationally committed to this work. And we have a new post we just recruited last week, a curator of Indigenous perspectives, who wants to really explore the context in which we're working and how we as institutions might need to shift some of our practices. Well, we do need to shift some of our practices, whether that's around how we make room for the emotional, the spiritual, whether it's around our databases, interpretation, you name it. And I think once we can bring all of those to the fore, actually that might be a better way for us to address any political fear than finding ourselves being in defensive mode, which I don't think helps any of us. I think what we need to do is we need to embrace the complexity.
Well spoken, I would say, because things are not simple and things are never the same, which is also a point. And it's great to hear that you're appointing colleagues who can help you develop this field. There's a couple of other questions in the chat, some practical. One I like particularly working in the University Museum was from Katie. And she says, some inspiring examples here of projects and approaches. Do you think there is something about university museums that means they are particularly well placed to take a leadership role in developing new approaches and practices that we can all learn from? I don't know, Neil or Laura?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's part, I mean, there's this, the word understanding is sitting in a lot of this, and I think there's, there's understanding is knowledge and understanding is empathy, and I think universities are places that are always trying to challenge and question, and so there's an interest in repatriation and restitution in the institution as a whole that I found very supportive. And I think there's allied to that, I've certainly had a sense of greater freedom than I think I might have had in a different context to explore things that might not have an obvious outcome. And so I think, that we've got a duty as university museums to do that and to try things out and maybe to get things wrong, and because I think we're allowed to do that a bit more than other people may be.
Yeah, I think similarly, I just tried to answer the question also because I wasn't sure whether we were going to come to it, but I think our governance structure really helps with making that possible. But also, I think that the nature of our organizations being driven by academic thinking and research and sort of really, making sure that we're looking at, being in line with the current thinking of our disciplines helps with us being sort of more open and actually really open to the 21st century, where anthropology and archaeology is very much looking to see that, and in the know that there's not just one way of seeing the world, that there are many epistemologies, and that those epistemologies are what makes us humanity so interesting. So it's about epistemology as in the ways of knowing and the ontologies of ways of being. If we can start unlocking those, and in many cases these objects that we are looking at, and very much what Esme was saying, that we tend to focus on that we're losing something. Actually, these objects are often being studied for the first time, and they're not just being studied from a 19th century white perspective. They're actually being studied in a way that we will be unlocking much more meaningful understanding of those objects by working together with communities instead of shutting people out.
Yeah. That is, I think that's a very, very good point. I think the one thing that can be said about this particular question actually of universities is that indeed we have, of course, a massive resource in all the intellect that is brought together in such an institution, and that quite often we can draw on, and that can help us do this work. There was actually another question that I thought actually was particularly well suited for Laura to look at. Have you experienced any pushback in terms of staff or visitors who may feel possessive over collections? How do you explain the positive nature of repatriation to those not directly involved in the process? And I think I saw your museum on the front page of the Telegraph, when you had taken some things of display recently. So I thought, you may have something to say about that.
Yes, so on the Maasai project, we've not had a lot of pushback, but actually a huge amount of engagement of people being really enthusiastic about what's happening. But on the, so there's a number of objects that we've taken off display, and which are including the Tsansa, or sort of shrunken heads. Those we have had, so on the one hand, I think the Daily Telegraph, to be fair, especially in the magazine, had a very fair and long discussion about why we were doing these things. But there is quite a bit of pushback, and I am personally really interested in why so many people still feel entitled, that entitlement and those entangled entitlements to who feels that they have a right to, on the one hand, study, on the other one, learn from, on the other hand, see those objects, and especially human remains in particular, where people will say that we're trailblazing organization. I think in some aspects we are, and many of us who are represented here are trailblazing in making sure that we're more open and more listening and more learning in a sort of iterative, organic approach, while at the same time, taking human remains off display is not trailblazing. Most organizations have done this 40 years ago. So in that sense, most museums have understood that, this practice of collecting human remains, of measuring bones and skulls, is a really problematic part of our discipline, where we were trying to prove that certain people were inferior to others who were considered superior, and that sort of black and brown bodies were there for our learning and our entertainment and our research. And I think that is absolutely something that needs to be revisited from our contemporary perspectives, meaning that they might need to return, and that it might not be the privilege of some to be looking at those things and learning from those things. So yes, there is pushback. I think none of this work will happen without pushback. Organizationally, however, in our organizations, this was very much something that we've been working on together. I think we speak in one voice around these aspects of our work, but obviously we have, a plethora of different research projects happening. It's also, I think, that search for complexity is so important, because as Neil sort of already mentioned earlier, there is no one recipe for all of these different projects. So with the Maasai, pushing towards the absolute return of these objects is not what they have indicated they want. They want us to wait, listen, wait for them to go back to the community, talk things through, have real spiritual guidance. That is why this long-term engagement is so important, and also a patience that is required of organizations, also when they are so ready to move.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Esme?
Yeah, can I just build on that, because I think it's a really important point. So we did return 43 secret sacred ceremonial objects, but there are many more that actually both the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the traditional owners, and AATSIS were really keen that they were in Manchester. We have a memorandum of understanding with them to work on those displays. It was really important to them. And actually they were very fascinated in what the engagement was from people in Manchester. So just on that pushback, I think there is an opportunity here for us to really open up citywide conversations about all of the things that Laura has talked about. You know, we hosted a small handover event, which actually was focused more on the methodology and the ethics that AATSIS have been using, where everybody got to meet that extraordinary man, Mangu Bhattacharya, who was at the handover speech. And it was full of Mancunians asking all these questions. And actually, that feels really important to me. We did an afternoon tea when they came to visit, and we had some elders from Manchester meeting elders from the community, like when elders meet elders. And it was, honestly, it was the most joyful hour or two just of conversation and connecting and just care for each other. So I think in a way that pushback, let's not get ourselves stuck into that defensive role. Let's open up the conversation as wide as we possibly can.
Okay. Can I maybe ask Valerie, as our honored guest here in this panel? Valerie, I mean, there's a lot of experience in the US with the framework of NAGPRA, of the Native American Grave Protection Act. Has that mean that the practice of repatriation of objects and human remains to First Nations in the US become normalized completely now?
I don't know that I would say normalized completely. And I do think, just as, you know, the discussion has been, it's kind of community to community, if you will, and organization to organization, how that works and how the remains are returned. There's quite a bit of a process, as everyone knows, that goes through this. And just as you have all mentioned, it's the same way. It's building that relationship with the community. It's people talking within their own communities about what happens next. You know, how does this go? We rebury, what happens? So there is a lot of preparation and there's a lot of conversations. For us, we have done repatriation, we have done reburials, and of course we are very pleased to be able to do that for our ancestors. And I think that that's one of the most important things of this entire conversation is understanding that, and I know everyone here does, but you know, that's people's ancestors, that's their great grandmother, you know, so treating it more like humans, I guess, is one of the most important parts of this.
I think we deserve that all. I think we thank you very much, Valerie, for that. We are moving towards the end of the session, and there's a massive amount of questions around resourcing and funding this kind of work. I think the idea of this particular session was already to start sharing some of the experiences that we've had in the projects that we've worked on. There's many more to come. And I think there's already quite a lot of resources being made available by the different actors in these processes. I want to mention also that there's more projects going to happen. There's a big Africa restitution network, also based from Oxford. It's going to start this fall, where a number of museums are going to be part of, amongst them Manchester and Glasgow. So there's much more to come, and I think sharing the experiences and teaming up with other institutions, and I can imagine, especially for instance, around to work with AATSIS and work around the Australian Aboriginal collections, because there's a lot of similar ones in the country actually, and that could make a lot of sense actually to join forces, but definitely to share that expertise. Can I invite any famous last words from any one of you? Neil, I cut you short there. Maybe.
Yeah. No, it's just one part. I noticed that it's not just about being large, well-funded museums. I mean, I'd emphasise, Aberdeen actually has a particularly small staff. I mean, there are about 4 museum people when we're doing this. It's about setting it as a priority and seeing it as something that really gets into the soul of the museum. It's what you do. Therefore, when we had in 2004, following our first repatriation, we had an exhibition about repatriation. which we had a feedback bit in that. We only had one critical comment, but I do bear with pride having been described as Britain's maddest museum in the Sunday Telegraph. But it really has just become a really important thing for what we do. So it doesn't need to be large, lavish, lots of research time.
Okay, fair enough, Neil. Esme?
Yeah, I just wanted one thing to add, which was also just the power and maybe untapped potential in us all, whatever shape, size, governance we are, working together more. And whether there are opportunities. It's why I'm excited about something like a kind of indigenizing network, or, you know, whether there are more opportunities for us to share experiences, apply jointly for funding, whatever it might be. It sort of feels like that feels a good future to me. And I think when there is pushback, I think the solidarity that you get from that sense of collective endeavour across all our museums might hold us in really good stead as well.
Well, I think those are really great last words. Thank you, Esme. And I wanted to thank our panelists. First and foremost, Valerie, for joining us from Oklahoma. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Neil, Esme, Laura, and I'll give back to Simon.
Thanks, Steph. That was a really wonderful session. The chat's been fantastic. People are sort of networking and sort of, you know, forming ideas to get together and move this work forward. It's been brilliant. It's been just, this session's been described as brilliant, inspiring, fascinating, moving, amazing. So great work, panel. It is really, really good session. So our next session starts in 15 minutes. That's looking at grassroots networks in the sector. Don't forget the MA Hub is open for the rest of the day, so you can drop in there for a chat and advice. But finally, thanks again to all the speakers and Steph for chairing so well. It was a really great session. See you all soon. Thanks so much.